I've always been the kind of person who needs time alone every now and then, you know? I work as a graphic designer, and being stuck in front of a screen all day really drains me. A few months ago, I decided I needed a break. No technology, no city noise, just me and nature. That's when I found the perfect Airbnb, a cabin deep in the woods, completely isolated. The host assured me it was safe, with decent cell service in case of emergencies, and even a fireplace for chilly nights. I couldn't wait to spend a few days there, just listening to the sound of the trees and the wind. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was starting to set, and everything looked exactly like the photos. A rustic, cozy cabin surrounded by dense trees. It was perfect. The first night went by peacefully. I had a simple dinner, sat on the porch with a cup of tea, and listened to the crickets. It was exactly what I needed. But the next morning, as I was having coffee, I noticed something strange out the window. Outside, among the trees, there was a man standing there. He was about 50 yards away, tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring in the direction of the cabin. My first thought was that he was a hunter, or maybe a local passing through. But even as I tried to rationalize it, a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't normal, right? I stood there for a few minutes, watching him, until he suddenly turned and slowly walked into the forest, disappearing among the trees. I tried to brush it off and go about my day, but the image of that man standing there stuck in my mind. Later in the afternoon, I decided to explore the area to distract myself and get a better feel for the place. I brought my phone with me, more for a sense of security than anything else since the signal wasn't great. The forest was dense and eerily quiet, and the trees seemed taller than I remembered from the night before. The further I walked, the stronger the feeling that I was being watched. Sure, it could have been paranoia after what I saw in the morning, but the unease was hard to shake. When I returned to the cabin, the sun was already setting. I locked the door and tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Then, around 8 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. My heart raced. Who would be knocking on the door of an isolated cabin in the middle of the woods? I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was him, the same man. Now I could see more details. His face was thin, almost too pale, and his eyes were deep-set, unblinking. He didn't look aggressive, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way he just stood there, waiting. When I asked who he was, he replied in a calm, low voice, "I'm lost. I need help finding my way." My first instinct was to hesitate. Something about him felt off, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore a plea for help. You always hear stories about not trusting strangers, but in situations like that, the line between caution and humanity gets blurry. I told him I didn't know the area well and suggested he head to the main road. He stood there a moment longer, then finally walked away, disappearing into the trees. I made sure to watch him until he disappeared into the trees before closing all the curtains and double-checking the locks. From that moment on, the cabin didn't feel as welcoming. Every creak of the wood or sound from outside made me jump. I tried distracting myself by watching something on my phone, but the battery soon died, and the sense of isolation only grew stronger. I spent the rest of the night listening to the wind and trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he really was lost, and I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. The next morning, I decided to head out early and walk around the cabin to see if I could spot any footprints or signs that he'd come back. I didn't find anything, which should have been reassuring, but it only made me feel more uneasy. I went back inside and resolved to stay in for the rest of the day, keeping the doors locked. It seemed like a good plan, until dusk. Around 6 p.m., as I was preparing something to eat, I heard footsteps on the porch. This time there was no knock, just the sound of someone moving outside. My chest tightened, and before I could decide what to do, I heard that same voice again. "I'm lost again." It was him. The same calm, deep voice. But this time, it felt closer. Almost intimate, like he knew I was standing there, frozen, listening. I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding my breath, as if that could make me invisible. He didn't knock on the door this time, or ask to come in. He just stayed outside, repeating those same words in a mechanical tone. "I'm lost again." That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The living room curtains were still open. Out of the corner of my eye, I slowly turned toward the window, and there he was, standing on the porch, staring directly at me. His face looked even more off up close, like his features weren't entirely human, but something trying to mimic it. He didn't smile, didn't make any threatening movements. He just stood there, waiting for me to do something. My first instinct was to run to the kitchen and grab the nearest knife. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat on the floor, gripping the knife tightly. The silence outside was worse than the footsteps or his voice. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to peek out the bedroom window, which faced the back of the cabin. He was gone. I thought about running to the car, but the fear that he might be hiding nearby stopped me. I tried calling the Airbnb host's emergency number, but as expected, there was no signal. It was just me and him now, and all I could do was hope he'd leave, or figure out how to escape before things got worse. The night was pure hell. I spent hours sitting on the floor of the bedroom, holding the knife, trying to listen for any sound that might mean he was still there. The silence was so heavy that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion got the better of me, and I must have dozed off. I woke up to a loud thud, like something had fallen. My first thought was that he'd made it inside. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the knife as I stood up. I took a deep breath, telling myself I had to act. I opened the bedroom door slowly, knife in hand, and stepped out. The living room looked exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The front door, which I'd locked, was wide open. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The door wasn't broken, and the locks were still intact. That's when I heard footsteps inside the house, coming from the kitchen. My body froze. The steps were slow, deliberate, as if he knew I was listening. Every instinct told me to run, but I knew if he was already inside, there was nowhere to go. Summoning the last shred of courage I had, I walked to the living room, keeping my eyes on the hallway that led to the kitchen. When I reached the doorway, I saw his silhouette. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at me with that same blank, unsettling expression, as if waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what to do. My survival instincts were screaming at me to run, but fear kept me rooted in place. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stared at me. The silence was so oppressive, it felt like it was crushing the room. That's when I noticed something in his hand, a crumpled piece of paper. Slowly, he raised his arm and dropped it to the floor, as if he wanted me to take it. I don't know where I found the courage, but I took a step forward, still clutching the knife, and picked up the paper. There was something written on it, but the kitchen light was too dim to make it out. When I looked back up, he was gone. I didn't hear footsteps or doors opening. He had just vanished. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my things and ran to the car. The car door was unlocked, something I could have sworn I'd secured before. I jumped in, started the engine, and drove without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station on the main road, just as the sun was rising. It was only then that I finally worked up the nerve to look at the paper. It wasn't writing. It was a drawing, crudely done, like a child's sketch. It showed a cabin surrounded by trees, with a figure standing in the window. It was the same cabin I'd stayed in. But what sent chills down my spine was the faint outline of a second drawing, almost erased, layered over the first. A human figure inside the cabin, holding what looked like a knife. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I never went back to that forest and contacted the Airbnb host to warn them. The host only replied that other guests had mentioned strange occurrences, but that no one had seen the man. I don't know who or what he was or what he wanted, but one thing is certain: that place wasn't normal. If you're ever thinking about renting an isolated cabin to unwind, take my advice. Choose carefully. I'm not usually one to stay in Airbnbs, but that October, I had no choice. I was in Denver for a work conference, and since everything downtown was too expensive, I ended up renting a small house on the outskirts, in a neighborhood that had clearly seen better days. The streets were full of potholes, the houses had rusted fences, and at night, almost no lights were on in the windows. But I tried not to think much of it. The place had good reviews, and the host seemed friendly. When I arrived, the house wasn't anything special, an old structure with peeling paint, but inside, it was clean, and the couch looked comfortable enough to relax on after a long day. That night, I was exhausted. I'd spent the whole day running between meetings and presentations and barely had the energy to eat a sandwich before collapsing into bed. The bed was old, creaking at the slightest movement, but it was enough. I remember glancing at the clock, 10:13 p.m., before turning off the lights and passing out. I thought the neighborhood would be noisy, but everything was eerily quiet. No barking dogs, no cars driving by, not even the faint hum of a TV. It was a heavy silence, almost unsettling, but I didn't dwell on it. All I wanted was a good night's sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. It wasn't a noise that woke me, nor a bad dream. It was something different, like the air around me was heavy, loaded with a tension I couldn't explain. The room was dark, but a faint beam of light from the street filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the furniture just enough. I lay there for a few seconds, completely still, trying to understand why my body felt on high alert. That's when I noticed something that froze me to my core, a figure standing at the foot of the bed. My heart was racing, but I couldn't move. The figure was tall, thin, and completely motionless. I couldn't see its face because the dim light barely outlined its silhouette, but it was definitely a person. My first thought was that maybe I was dreaming, but the chill running down my spine was far too real. There was no sound, no movement, except for my heart pounding uncontrollably. For a moment, I thought about screaming, but something inside me told me that wasn't a good idea. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to figure out a way out of this. My mind was racing, desperately searching for a plan. There were no weapons or objects nearby that I could use to defend myself. I thought about grabbing my phone from the nightstand, but my arm felt paralyzed. The intruder didn't make a sound or move. That was what scared me the most, the complete absence of movement. Finally, I mustered the courage to sit up in bed, moving as slowly as possible to avoid provoking him. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse with fear. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, like a living shadow, staring at me. Then, as if snapped out of a trance, it moved. Not in a normal way. It was slow, almost unnatural, as if it were gliding backward toward the bedroom door. My heart felt like it was about to burst. As soon as it disappeared down the hallway, I jumped out of bed. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my keys, which luckily were still in the pocket of my pants on the floor, and ran for the front door. When I opened it, the cold night air hit my face, and that's when I realized how much I was sweating. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following me. I sprinted to my car parked on the street and got inside so fast that I didn't even notice I was barefoot. Inside the car, trembling and breathing heavily, I tried to calm down. I started the engine and shifted into gear without even thinking about where I was going. My only goal was to get as far away from that house as possible. The street was deserted, and the silence outside made everything even scarier. As I drove, the adrenaline began to wear off, and I started to realize how surreal everything felt. Who was that person? How did they get in? And more importantly, why didn't they attack me? After a few minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store that, thankfully, was still open. I went inside, still shaking, not even sure what I was looking for. The clerk gave me a strange look, probably because I looked like a mess, barefoot, rumpled clothes, and completely out of it. I grabbed a coffee just to have something to hold and sat at a table in the corner of the store, trying to organize my thoughts. That's when another horrifying realization hit me. I hadn't grabbed anything but my keys and the clothes I was wearing. My phone, wallet, backpack, everything was still at the house. Panic set in all over again. I couldn't just leave everything behind, but there was no way I could go back. After almost an hour of trying to gather my courage, I decided to call the Airbnb host. I borrowed the store clerk's phone, explaining the situation in a disjointed, panicked way. He looked at me suspiciously, but let me use it. When the host picked up, her voice was groggy, clearly having been woken up. I tried to explain quickly. "There's someone in the house. They came into the bedroom while I was sleeping." But what she said left me even more disturbed. That's never happened before. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" My frustration grew, but I knew arguing with her wouldn't solve anything. I realized I had no choice but to go back. I couldn't lose my documents, my phone, and all my belongings. I got back in the car and drove toward the house, parking a few meters away to keep a safe distance. The silence on the street felt even heavier than before. When I got out of the car, my bare feet made soft noises against the cold pavement. With my heart pounding, I approached the front door. It was unlocked, just as I had left it. I stepped inside cautiously, turning on the lights as I went. The place seemed empty, but something felt off. My belongings were gone. Every bag, every piece of clothing, even the phone that had been on the nightstand. Everything had vanished, as if I'd never been there. My mind was in shock. None of it made sense. Whoever that intruder was, they hadn't just invaded the place. They'd taken absolutely everything I owned. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, trying to find any clues, but the house felt colder and emptier than before. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. There were scratches on the wall in the hallway near the bedroom. I moved closer, and my stomach churned at the sight of the crude markings, as if they'd been made with nails or something sharp. They looked like symbols, but I couldn't make sense of them. It felt like they were left as some kind of warning. Without thinking much more, I called the host again and told her I wasn't staying another night. She insisted I report the incident to the police, but all I cared about was getting out of there. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked outside a nearby hotel, where I stayed until morning. When I finally called the police the next day, they went to the house but found nothing. Not the symbols, not my belongings. Everything had vanished. To this day, I don't know who that figure was or what they wanted. All I know is that the silence of that night will haunt me forever. I've never been the type to rent cabins or houses to work, but at that time, I had no choice. It was 2021, at the height of remote work, and I desperately needed a place to focus and finish an important project. I live in a noisy city, and with my neighbor renovating the apartment next door, the idea of a secluded cabin seemed perfect. I found an Airbnb that looked ideal, a small wooden house deep in the woods, about 30 miles from the nearest town. The reviews described it as peaceful and perfect for relaxing. Little did I know, what I'd find there would be anything but relaxing. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, just in time to settle in before sunset. The cabin was charming, with a porch surrounded by dense trees and the smell of aged wood that gave it a cozy feeling. The owner had left a note on the kitchen table with basic instructions: how to turn on the heater, where to find the utensils, that sort of thing. The internet was surprisingly good for such an isolated spot, which was essential for me. After unpacking, I took a quick walk around the property. The place felt so quiet that even the sound of leaves rustling in the wind seemed louder than usual. It was only when I returned inside that I noticed something strange. There were small footprints in the dirt near the back door, as if someone had been walking around. At the time, I convinced myself it must have been a small animal, maybe a dog from the nearest neighbor, who, according to the map, lived nearly a mile away. That night, everything seemed calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While making tea in the kitchen, I noticed one of the windows in the living room was slightly open. I found it odd because I was sure I had closed them all when I arrived. Again, I tried not to overthink it. Maybe the wind had forced it open, or maybe I was just tired. I shut the window, locked the front door, and went to bed. I was exhausted, but the complete silence of the place made it hard to sleep. It felt like every little sound, no matter how faint, echoed throughout the house. In the middle of the night, I heard a creak coming from the living room. My heart raced. I stayed frozen for a few minutes, trying to listen for anything else, but the silence returned. I convinced myself it was just the wood expanding in the cold. The next morning, as I drank my coffee, I noticed one of the chairs in the living room wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It was a small armchair, easy to move. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to recall if I had moved it myself and just forgotten. I decided not to dwell on it. My deadline was tight, and I needed to focus. I spent the day on my laptop, but I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was out of place. By late afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Alongside the small footprints I had seen the night before, there were now fresher ones, even closer to the back door. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and went back inside, locking the door carefully this time. That night, the feeling that something was wrong grew even stronger. After dinner, I noticed my water bottle, which I had left on the side table by the couch, was now on the kitchen counter. There was no way I had moved it without realizing it. My heart started racing, but I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I spent the rest of the night working, but every noise from outside, rustling leaves, branches snapping in the distance, made me feel more uneasy. Before going to bed, I double-checked all the locks, making sure no windows or doors were left open. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a muffled sound coming from beneath the floor. It was rhythmic, like something being dragged in the crawl space under the cabin. My whole body froze. For a few minutes, I stayed completely still, holding my breath and listening to that repetitive noise. Finally, I mustered the courage to turn on the bedroom light and grab my phone. I turned on the flashlight and walked to the living room, trying to ignore the fear making my hands tremble. That's when I noticed the small hatch in the kitchen, something I hadn't seen before. It was covered in a layer of dust, but there was a fresh mark, as if it had been moved recently. My heart pounded in my chest. Whatever was down there wasn't still. I thought about calling the cabin's owner, but honestly, I was frozen in fear. Each step toward the hatch felt heavier than the last, and the flashlight in my hand shook uncontrollably. When I finally got close, I crouched down slowly and touched the edge of the hatch. It was slightly loose, like it had been opened recently and not put back properly. I took a deep breath, bracing myself to open it, but the sound from below stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was terrifyingly silent, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat feels deafening. Summoning every ounce of courage I didn't know I had, I pulled the hatch open. Beneath it was a dark, cramped space, illuminated only by the flickering beam of my flashlight. The smell of mildew and dust was overwhelming, but what caught my attention were the items scattered below. There was an old mattress covered by a dirty sheet and several personal belongings: a mug, a pair of worn-out children's sneakers, and a small backpack. My stomach churned at the sight. Someone had clearly been living down there. But the most chilling part was the feeling that I wasn't alone. A cold draft rose from the crawl space, making me step back just as I heard something moving deeper in the shadows. At that point, all I could think about was getting out of there as fast as possible. I slammed the hatch shut and ran to the bedroom to grab my things. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a while to shove my phone into my pocket and open my suitcase. The silence from below was even more terrifying than the noise I had heard earlier, as if whatever was down there was waiting for me to let my guard down. I tried to convince myself it was just some desperate intruder using the space for shelter, but something about the situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. While I was packing in a frenzy, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like light, quick footsteps circling the cabin. I ran to the window to look out, but the darkness was too thick to see anything. I grabbed my car key and walked to the front door, but as I unlocked it, I noticed the latch on the back door had been tampered with. By that point, I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. I just bolted, throwing open the front door and running into the cold night, the crunch of dry leaves beneath my feet as I sprinted toward my car parked out front. I reached the car with my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were trembling so much that it took me a few tries to get the key into the ignition. As soon as the engine started, I turned on the headlights and looked back at the cabin. It seemed quiet, almost harmless, but something in the window reflections made my skin crawl. There was no one visible inside, but the headlights illuminated something near the back door. Fresh footprints in the dirt. Not just the small ones I'd seen before. These were of different sizes, like more than one person had recently been there. I didn't wait to find out. I threw the car into gear and sped away, navigating the winding forest road as fast as I could. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me, even after I left the cabin far behind. I reached a gas station in the nearest town, shaken to the core. While waiting inside the convenience store for someone to call the police, I replayed everything that had happened in my mind. The hatch, the sounds, the belongings down there. Whoever had been there had been living right beneath me. The police arrived about an hour later, but I never learned the outcome of the investigation. The cabin's owner never responded to me, and the Airbnb listing disappeared a few days later.